My name is Chloe Vance. I'm 25 years old. 9 years ago, on a stormy November night, my father looked me in the eye and said, "Get out. I don't need a sick daughter like you." I was 16, soaking wet with nowhere to go. The reason? My younger sister told a lie. A calculated, deliberate lie that my parents believed without question. And just like that, I was erased. 4 hours later, police called them to the hospital. I'd been hit by a car. When Dad walked into that hospital room and saw who was advocating for me, his hands wouldn't stop shaking. You can't be here." The woman standing there was Dr. Margaret Hayes, one of the most respected academic professors and policy advocates in the state. She was the driver who had accidentally hit me in the blinding rain, but instead of walking away, she stayed. That night changed everything. 2 months ago, I stood on stage at my sister's college graduation ceremony as the keynote speaker. My parents had no idea I was coming. Before I tell you what happened when they realized who was at the podium, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Drop a comment below. Now let me take you back to where it all started. I learned to measure love like a scientific equation early on. In our house, the variables were always rigged. Harper's tears equaled immediate attention. My achievements equaled 0. When I was 12, I sprinted up our concrete driveway, my lungs burning, clutching a cheap blue ribbon. First place at the regional science fair. My water filtration project had beaten 50 other students. I could still feel the judges shaking my hand, the heavy weight of that scratchy silk ribbon feeling like pure gold against my palm. I pushed the front door open, the hinges squeaking in the quiet house. "Mom, I won," I shouted, the words tumbling out of me. Mom stood at the kitchen island, slicing carrots. She paused, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and offered a fleeting, distracted smile. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." She gave me a quick, one-armed hug. It felt light, hollow. Before I could show her the judge's score sheet, the back door slammed open. Harper, then 9 years old, stood in the doorway. Her face was flushed deep red, her ballet bag dragging on the linoleum floor. Tears streamed down her cheeks in heavy wet lines. "I messed up," Harper gasped, her voice trembling. "I messed up my pirouette. Everyone laughed at me." Mom's arms dropped from my shoulders instantly. The shift in the room's gravity was immediate. She abandoned the carrots, crossed the kitchen in 3 quick strides, and dropped to her knees. She pulled Harper into a tight, protective embrace, completely turning her back to me. "Oh baby," Mom cooed, stroking Harper's hair. "It's okay. Shoo, you'll do better next time. Those girls don't know anything." I stood there, my breathing slowing down. The blue ribbon felt suddenly light, stupid and small in my hand. I waited for a minute, then 2. Neither of them looked back. I quietly folded the ribbon, slipped it into my pocket, and walked upstairs. That ribbon ended up crumpled in the back of my desk drawer. That was the baseline of our family dynamics. Harper was sensitive. Harper required careful handling. I learned to celebrate quietly, to take up less space, to become a ghost. By the time I was 15, my analytical mind recognized the pattern perfectly. Straight A+ didn't compete with Harper's C+ drama. If I brought home an award, Dad would barely glance up from his laptop. "Expected, Chloe. Good job." But if Harper passed a math test she'd been failing, Mom would order a cake. The real breaking point started with an envelope. I checked the mail on a Tuesday and found the thick, crisp envelope from a prestigious university. I tore it open on the porch. Full scholarship. 3 weeks studying environmental science with actual researchers. It was my ticket out of that suffocating house. A chance to be around people who cared about facts, about reality, about me. That night at dinner, the clinking of silverware against porcelain felt unusually loud. I took a deep breath. "I got accepted into the summer science camp," I said, my voice steady. "With a full scholarship." Dad stopped chewing. He looked up, his eyes scanning me for a brief second before returning to his plate. "That's nice, Chloe. Good for your college applications." Across the table, Harper's fork clattered against her plate. Her eyes instantly welled with tears. Her bottom lip pushed out, trembling with practiced precision. "Why does she get to go away?" Her voice climbed an octave, shrill and shaking. "That's not fair. I never get to do anything special. I'm stuck here all summer." Mom instantly reached across the table, squeezing Harper's shoulder. She shot me a desperate, pleading look. Chloe, maybe you could skip it this year. Your sister has been having a hard time with her friends, and I need you here," Harper finished. Her tears miraculously paused for a fraction of a second as she looked directly at me. I saw it then, the cold, calculated flash behind her wet eyes. She wasn't sad. She was winning. It's a full scholarship, Mom, I said, my heart hammering against my rib. I earned it. Dad sighed, a heavy, irritated sound. Chloe, don't be selfish. It's about family unity. Be the bigger person. Your sister needs support right now. I looked at the three of them. A united front. A closed circle. I didn't go to the camp. They convinced themselves it was a lesson in empathy. I learned a different lesson. My success was a threat to Harper's comfort, and in our house, Harper's comfort was the only law. I made myself smaller, quieter, undemanding, but you can only compress something so much before the pressure becomes too great. The explosion was coming. I just didn't realize it would happen in the middle of a literal storm. The lying didn't start with an explosion. It crept in like a cold draft under the door, chilling the house degree by degree. Harper, now 13, was testing her boundaries, learning exactly how far her tears could bend reality. It began with small things. A favorite sweater of mine missing from my closet. When I found it balled up on Harper's unmade bed, I brought it downstairs. I was careful to keep my voice steady, strictly regulating my tone. Any hint of frustration would be the spark that lit her crying. Harper, please don't borrow my clothes without asking, I said softly. Harper didn't even blink. She looked right at me, her eyes wide and perfectly innocent. I never touched your sweater. You must have dropped it in my room. Mom, wiping down the kitchen counters, didn't look up. She just let out a long, exhausted sigh. Chloe, please, don't start fights. Just let her wear it. I realized then that truth didn't matter. Only peace mattered, and I was the only one expected to pay for it. But the real shift, the moment the floorboards of my life truly started to rot, happened over $75. I was in my room organizing my chemistry notes when the heavy footsteps started up the stairs. The house was dead quiet. I could hear the distinct sound of Dad's dress shoes hitting the wood. He paused outside my door before turning the handle without knocking. Chloe, my study, now. His voice was flat, empty of warmth. My stomach tightened. I closed my notebook and followed him down the hall. The air in his study always smelled of leather and stale coffee. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind us, the sound echoing like a lock sliding into place. Dad stood behind his desk, leaning forward on his knuckles. He didn't offer me a seat. Did you take money from your mother's wallet? He asked. The question dropped like a stone. I froze. My brain, trained to analyze data, scrambled to make sense of the accusation. What? No, of course I didn't. $75 is missing from her purse, he said, his eyes narrowing, studying me like I was a stranger. I haven't even been in the kitchen today, I pleaded, my heart hammering against my ribs. I left for school early to finish a lab project. Ask my biology teacher, Mr. Davis. He opened the classroom for me at 7 a.m. I offered the facts, hoping they would act as a shield. Dad's jaw tightened. A small muscle ticked in his cheek. He didn't care about my facts. Harper says she saw you near your mother's purse right before you left. The room seemed to tilt. The injustice of it punched the breath right out of my lungs. Harper is lying, I said, my voice rising, the carefully controlled calmness finally cracking. Don't accuse your sister. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. But I didn't do it. Why would I steal? I took a step forward, desperate for him to really look at me. I have my own savings from tutoring. It doesn't make logical sense. Enough. The word cut through the air like a whip. I am disappointed in you, Chloe. I thought you were better than this. Stealing from your own mother, and then trying to blame your younger sister. He grounded me. He took my phone for 2 months. And worse, the science camp opportunity I had been promised for the following summer, my one lifeline, was revoked. We can't trust you with independence right now, Mom had said later that evening, refusing to meet my eyes. I walked upstairs, my chest heavy with a suffocating, helpless grief. As I reached the landing, I looked up. Harper was sitting on the top step, her knees pulled to her chest. When she heard Dad's study door close downstairs, her face changed. The frightened, tearful little girl vanished. The corners of her mouth twitched, slowly pulling up into a small, self-satisfied smirk. She tilted her head, her eyes gleaming with cold victory. That stolen $75 was never about the money. It was a test run. She was learning that in this house she was untouchable, and she could use me as her shield. The pattern escalated rapidly after that. A shattered antique vase in the hallway. Harper cried and said I bumped the table. My fault. A failed math test Harper hadn't opened a book for. I should have tutored her better. A nasty rumor going around school about Harper cheating on a quiz. I must have started it out of jealousy. Jealousy. The word was laughable, but they believed her. They always chose her tears over my truth. I stopped defending myself. What was the point of presenting evidence to a judge who had already decided you were guilty? By the time I was 16, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I was present but invisible, only acknowledged when they needed a scapegoat. I started spending all my time at the town library. I would sit at a desk in the furthest corner, surrounded by the smell of old paper and dust, breathing in the quiet. I told my teachers I just loved studying, but the truth was much darker. I was hiding. I would look at the clock ticking on the library wall, counting down the days. 2 more years, I told myself, clutching my textbooks. I just need to survive until college. If I stay quiet, if I stay invisible, I can make it 2 more years. I was so incredibly wrong. The real storm hadn't even begun. November of my junior year brought a biting cold that seemed to seep right through the walls of our house. The air inside always felt heavy, like the moments right before a thunderstorm breaks. I survived by focusing on variables I could control. AP chemistry was my safe harbor. Balancing equations was logical. Action and reaction. It made sense in a way my family didn't. There was a boy in my class named Liam. He was a nice guy, played soccer, but he was absolutely terrible at stoichiometry. He had asked me for help a few times, and I'd stayed after the final bell to explain how the formulas worked. It was strictly academic. Just 2 students at a lab table with highlighters and textbooks. But Harper had a crush on him. A massive, suffocating crush. She was only a freshman, but she would purposefully take the long route past the junior hallway just to look into his classroom. Once, when I went into her room to retrieve a pen she'd borrowed, I saw her diary left open on her desk. Harper Vance Miller, written over and over in looping, practiced cursive. The spark that lit the fuse happened on a Wednesday. I was at my locker organizing my binders. The hallway was loud, filled with the slamming of metal doors and students rushing to the buses. Liam leaned against the locker next to mine. "Hey," he said, offering a relieved smile. "Thanks for the help yesterday. You really saved me on that quiz." "No problem," I said, closing my locker. "Just remember to balance the oxygen last." "I will." He shifted his backpack. "Maybe we could study together sometime for the midterm. I'm going to need it." "Sure. The library works." "Cool. See you tomorrow, Chloe." He gave a small wave and walked away down the hall. I turned around, zipping my bag, and stopped dead. 30 feet down the hallway, standing perfectly still in the middle of the moving crowd, was Harper. Her face was completely pale. She didn't look angry, she looked empty. Her eyes were locked onto me, unblinking. That night at dinner, the silence was deafening. Harper didn't cry, she didn't complain. She just pushed her pasta around her plate with the tip of her fork. Mom kept leaning over, her voice dripping with concern. "Sweetheart, what's wrong? Are you feeling sick?" Harper would just shrug, her eyes flicking up to meet mine for a fraction of a second. Cold, calculating. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I knew how to handle her tears, but this dead silence? This was new. This was dangerous. On Monday, the tension broke just a little, but not because of my family. A visiting lecturer came to my biology class. Her name was Dr. Margaret Hayes from the National College. She spoke about educational equity, how systems fail kids who don't fit the perfect mold, how youth fall through the cracks when the adults around them look the other way. I sat in the back row, my heart beating fast. I felt like she was speaking directly into my chest. When the bell rang, I stayed behind. I walked up to the podium, my hands slightly sweaty. "Dr. Hayes? Your lecture, it made a lot of sense. About how the system assumes everyone has a safe baseline to start from." She packed her notes, looking up at me. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, but surprisingly warm. "Many don't," she said quietly. "Are you interested in policy, Chloe?" "I think so. I just want to understand why things work the way they do." She studied me for a second, then reached into her leather bag and handed me a heavy cream-colored business card. "You have a curious mind," she said firmly. "Don't let anyone dim that light." I thanked her, sliding the card into my pocket. It felt like a small secret shield. I had no idea that tiny piece of paper would soon be the only thing tethering me to the world. A week later, on a Tuesday, the storm warnings started. The sky bruised into a deep, ugly purple by the afternoon. It was a massive front moving in. By dinner time, the wind was rattling the loose panes of the dining room windows. The weather alerts kept buzzing aggressively on Dad's phone. Wind advisories, flash flood warnings. The pressure in the house dropped. Everyone was tense. Harper was still barely speaking to me. She sat across the table, picking at her food. I could feel her eyes on me when I looked away. After we cleared the plates, I retreated to my bedroom. I sat at my desk, opening my English book, grateful for the heavy thud of the rain against the glass. It drowned out the silence of the house. At 9 p.m., the crying started. It wasn't a soft whimper. It was a sudden, violent sound coming from the living room downstairs. Loud, heaving sobs that cut right through the noise of the storm. I froze. I put my pen down slowly. My analytical mind began racing, calculating the variables. Did she hurt herself? Did she get a bad grade? What is the angle? Sweetheart, what's wrong? Mom's voice floated up the stairs, panicked and soothing all at once. Talk to me. Tell me what happened. More crying. Gulping for air. Then, the sound I had been dreading. Dad's voice. It wasn't concerned. It was sharp, hard, and laced with absolute fury. Chloe. The word echoed up the stairwell. Get down here now. My stomach dropped to the floor. My hands began to shake slightly. I pushed back my chair, the wooden legs scraping against the floorboards. I walked out of my room and started down the stairs. Every step felt like I was walking underwater. The house creaked violently as a gust of wind hit the roof. When I reached the bottom step, I looked into the living room. The only light came from the fireplace, and a single lamp. Harper was curled on the couch, her face buried in Mom's shoulder. Mom was rocking her, stroking her hair, glaring at me like I was a stranger who had just broken into their home. Dad stood by the fireplace. His arms were crossed tight over his chest, his face red and tight with anger. What's going on? I asked, keeping my voice as calm and neutral as possible. Harper slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were swollen, her cheeks wet. She looked at me, and in that flickering lamplight, for less than a second, her tears stopped, her facial muscles relaxed. I saw the pure cold calculation behind her eyes. The trap was set. Then just as quickly, her face crumpled back into a mask of pure agony. Tell her what you told us, Dad commanded. His voice was ice. Harper's lower lip trembled perfectly. She let out a jagged gasp. Why do you hate me so much? I stepped closer, genuinely confused. What? Harper, I don't hate you. Then why? She hiccuped, burying her face back in her hands. Why have you been spreading rumors about me at school? The floor felt like it was tilting. What rumors? About me and Liam, she wailed. About me cheating on that quiz. About me being a liar. My mind went entirely blank. Harper, I never. Don't lie to her, Mom said quietly, her voice thick with disappointment. Just don't, Chloe. I stared at the three of them. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch and grow. I didn't know exactly what machinery she had set into motion, but I knew I was already caught in the gears. I didn't spread any rumors, I said, my voice finally shaking. I don't know what you're talking about. Harper's hands were trembling perfectly as she pulled her phone from the pocket of her sweatpants. She didn't look at me. She held the bright screen out to Mom like it was a loaded weapon. Then explain this, Harper whispered, her voice cracking in all the right places. Mom took the phone, her eyes scanning the screen. I watched her face fall, the color draining from her cheeks. She handed the phone to Dad. Dad's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might break. What is it? I asked, my voice sounding thin and small in the large room. Dad shoved the phone toward me. It was a screenshot of a group chat. I leaned in, my brain, usually so good at organizing facts and variables, just stuttering to a halt. The messages were vicious. Mean, ugly comments about Harper being stupid, about her being a fake. And sitting right next to those awful words was my name, my profile picture. I didn't write those, I said immediately, taking a step back. The air in the room felt incredibly thin. Someone is faking my account. You know those apps exist, right? Fake text generators. Stop. Dad's voice cracked like thunder, drowning out the storm outside. Just stop lying to us, Chloe. I'm not. Dad, look at the timestamps. I was in biology lab when those were sent. I was begging them to use logic, to look at the data. And Liam, Harper sobbed, her face buried in a throw pillow. You knew I liked him. I told you I liked him. But you've been flirting with him, trying to make me look stupid. He asked me for help with chemistry. I practically shouted, my hands balling into fists at my sides. That's all it was. Tutoring. That's all. Harper suddenly sat up. The tears were still falling, but her voice was rising, sharp and biting. You've been staying after class with him, meeting him at the library. He told his friend he thinks you're pretty. You tried to steal him from me because you want to ruin my life." She was standing now. The little terrified girl act was slipping, replaced by something much darker. "And last week," Harper's breath hitched. She looked at Mom, her eyes wide with manufactured terror. "Last week you pushed me on the stairs." Look, the room went entirely still. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Harper slowly pulled up the left sleeve of her oversized sweater. Just below her elbow was a bruise. It was dark purple, edged in yellow, shaped perfectly like the grip of a hand. I stared at it. My analytical mind tried to process what I was seeing. I had never touched her. I avoided her. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The coldness of it. The absolute terrifying reality of what my sister was capable of. She did that to herself. She hurt her own body just to make sure I would drown. "I never touched you," I whispered, shaking my head. "Mom, I swear to you, I never laid a hand on her." "You did," Harper screamed. "Mom, she did." I didn't want to say anything because I thought maybe she was just stressed with school. Mom stood up, physically moving her body between me and Harper. It was a small movement, but it broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. She was protecting my sister from me. "Chloe, this is serious," Mom said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "If you hurt your sister—" "I didn't." "Then how did she get that bruise?" Dad demanded, taking a heavy step toward me. "I don't know." Panic was rising in my throat, choking me. Maybe she bumped into a desk. Maybe she did it to herself. The words hung in the air. A fatal mistake. Harper let out a wounded gasp, her eyes flying wide open. Fresh, heavy tears spilled over her eyelashes. "You think I'd hurt myself? Just to frame you?" "Yes," I was shouting now, utterly desperate, tears of pure frustration burning my own eyes. "Yes, because you do this. You lie. You stole that money. You break things, and you've been lying about me for years. Is this true, Chloe?" Dad's voice wasn't yelling anymore. It was deadly quiet. That was so much worse. "You've been bullying your sister, making her life miserable because you think you're so much smarter than everyone else?" "No. God, no. Please, Dad. Just listen to me. I've heard enough." Dad's fist slammed down on the wooden mantel of the fireplace. The heavy thud echoed off the walls. "I've heard enough of your excuses and your lies." "They're not excuses. She's lying." I turned to Mom. "Mom, please. You have to believe me. I would never hurt her. She's doing this because she's jealous. Because Liam didn't like her back." "There's nothing to explain," Mom said. She wouldn't even look me in the eye. She stared at a spot on the floor just past my shoes. "I thought we raised you better than this." Harper sobbed loudly into her hands. The perfect, flawless picture of a victim. I looked at her, really looked at her through the dim light of the lamp. And for a moment the hands covering her face shifted. She looked back at me through her fingers. Her eyes were completely dry. Cold. Calculating. Triumphant. "You're lying," I said to her, my voice dropping to a ragged whisper. "I'm not," she mumbled, and her voice didn't shake at all. I turned back to Dad, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. "She made all of this up. That's it." Dad's face went completely flat. The anger drained out, replaced by a profound, sickening disgust. He looked at me not like I was his child, but like I was a stranger who had tracked mud onto his clean carpet. "I don't want to hear another word from you. You're sick, Chloe. Something is deeply wrong with you." The word hit me right in the chest, knocking the air out of my lungs. "Sick. I'm not," I choked out. "You need help. Professional help. You're completely unhinged." He pointed a stiff finger toward the front hallway. "But right now I need you out of my sight." Outside, a loud crack of thunder shook the floorboards. The rain was pounding against the glass like a warning. "Dad, it's storming," I said, my voice breaking. "There's a flash flood warning." "I don't care. Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem." His face twisted with absolute rejection. "Get out. I don't need a sick daughter like you in this house. Go cool off. Go wherever you want. Just get out." The words carved themselves into my brain. Sick daughter. Like I was a disease that needed to be cut out to save the rest of the family. I looked at Mom, begging silently. "Say something. Stop him. Tell him this is insane. I'm 16. She turned away. She wrapped both arms around Harper and kept her back to me. I walked to the front door. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grab my thin windbreaker jacket from the hook. I didn't grab an umbrella. I didn't grab my backpack. I just pulled the zipper up with numb fingers. I pulled the heavy front door open. The wind immediately whipped my hair across my face, stinging my eyes. Before I stepped out into the black night, I looked back one last time. Through the gap in the hallway, I could see Harper watching me leave. She wasn't hiding behind Mom anymore. She was standing tall, and she was smiling. The door slammed shut behind me, the deadbolt clicking into place with a heavy final thud. The rain hit me like a solid wall of ice. Within seconds, my thin windbreaker was soaked through, clinging to my skin like a cold, wet, heavy blanket. I stood on the porch for a long time. The wind howled through the trees in our front yard, snapping small branches and throwing them across the grass. I crossed my arms tightly over my chest, shivering violently, and stared at the heavy wooden front door. My analytical mind, the part of me that always looked for logical patterns, told me to wait. They'll open it, I thought, my teeth chattering so hard my jaw ached. Any second now. Dad will open the door. He'll be angry, but he'll tell me to come back inside. It's a severe weather warning. Nobody leaves their kid out in a severe weather warning. I waited. I counted to 60. Then I counted to 60 again. Above me the porch light flicked off. The darkness that swallowed me was absolute. The click of that light switch felt louder than the thunder. It was a final, deliberate sentence. They weren't coming back. I turned away from the door and stepped off the porch. The water in the driveway was already up to my ankles. My canvas sneakers squelched heavily with every step, filling with freezing water. I pulled my phone from my pocket, shielding it with my hand. The screen lit up, illuminating the rain bouncing off the glass. Battery, 12%. No service, just a flickering single bar. My fingers were so numb I could barely type. I pressed Emily's contact name. It rang once, twice, and went straight to voicemail. I tried Hannah next. Voicemail. It was a Tuesday night in the middle of a massive, dangerous storm. Everyone else in town was inside. They were sitting in warm living rooms with their families, watching the news, safe and dry. Not me. I was the sick daughter, the one who had been cut out. The phone screen went black. Dead. I shoved it back into my pocket and started walking. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to get away from that house. Away from the windows where Harper might be watching me drown. The town library was my first thought, but it had closed hours ago. The bus station was 3 miles away, across the main intersection of town. If I could just make it there, I could sit inside the heated waiting room. I could dry off. I could figure out what to do when the sun came up. I kept my head down, leaning my body forward against the punishing wind. Every step was a battle. The streetlights flickered above me, casting long, nervous shadows across the flooded pavement. Cars drove past occasionally, their tires throwing huge sprays of dirty water over the sidewalks. I waved my arms once, hoping someone would stop. Nobody did. I was just a dark shape in the rain. My mind started to loop. The rhythm of my wet shoes hitting the concrete matched the words repeating in my head. Sick. 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 Why had Mom turned away? How could Dad look at me with such pure, unfiltered disgust? I tried to treat it like a chemistry problem, trying to find the missing variable that made the equation make sense. But there was no logic. There was only the brutal reality that my parents had looked at my sister's fake tears and decided I was a monster. Maybe they were right. Maybe something was wrong with me. Why else would my own family choose her over me, every single time, since I was a little girl? By the time I reached the main intersection, I was physically failing. My muscles cramped from the cold. I couldn't feel my toes or my fingers. The rain was coming down in blinding heavy sheets, making it impossible to see more than 10 feet ahead. I stopped at the crosswalk. The pedestrian light across the wide avenue glowed green. The little walking man was lit up. I was sure of it. I stepped off the curb and onto the slick, wet asphalt. I didn't see the headlights until they were right on top of me. They cut through the sheets of rain like two blazing white-hot suns. The blast of a car horn tore through the sound of the wind. Then, the terrifying high-pitched screech of tires locking up on wet pavement. My brain registered the danger, telling my legs to jump back. But my body was too frozen. Too slow. The impact threw me sideways. I felt a horrifying weightless sensation, followed instantly by the brutal, crushing force of my body hitting the metal hood. Then, the world spun, and I slammed onto the hard pavement. My head cracked against the road. A white-hot flash of pain exploded behind my eyes, so intense it knocked the breath completely out of my lungs. I lay there on my back, the rain pouring directly into my eyes and mouth. Everything sounded distorted, like I was underwater. The engine of the car idled loudly nearby. A door slammed open. Oh my God! Oh my God! Footsteps ran toward me, splashing heavily through the deep puddles. A woman dropped to her knees beside me. Her hands grabbed my shoulders, pressing down firmly to stop me from trying to sit up. "Sweetheart, don't move. Please, don't move. I'm calling 911. Her voice was thick with pure, shaking panic, but she moved with absolute focus. She pulled her phone out, balancing it between her shoulder and her ear, her hands hovering over my face to shield my eyes from the pounding rain. I tried to breathe, but my chest felt like it was wrapped in iron bands. I coughed, and the metallic, warm taste of blood coated my tongue. "Stay with me," the woman pleaded, looking down at me. Water streamed from her dark hair, dripping onto my jacket. "What's your name? Can you hear me?" I blinked, trying to clear my vision. Her face was blurry, illuminated only by the harsh glare of the headlights. She looked familiar. The sharp eyes, the strong jaw, the biology lecture, my damaged brain supplied faintly. "My parents," I managed to whisper. The words scraped against my throat. "Your parents." She leaned closer, her ear almost touching my mouth to hear me over the storm. "Okay, what's their number? Tell me, and I'll call them right now." I looked up at her, the rain mixing with the tears I hadn't realized I was crying. I remembered the porch light turning off. I remembered the lock clicking. "They don't," I choked out, my chest burning with a sharp, agonizing pain. "They don't want me." The woman froze. The phone slipped slightly from her shoulder. Her expression changed, the frantic panic melting away into something completely different. Deep shock. "What did you say?" she asked softly. "They kicked me out," I whispered. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy. The darkness at the edges of my vision was creeping in. "Said, I'm sick. Don't want me anymore." She stared at me. The wind howled around us, but for a second, the world felt completely still. I watched the realization hit her. The sheer horror of what I was doing out here alone at midnight in a state of emergency. Her hands tightened on my shoulders. The panic in her eyes vanished, replaced by a steely, unshakable resolve. Her voice dropped an octave, becoming a solid, grounding anchor in the chaos. "You are going to be okay," she said fiercely, leaning right into my line of sight so I couldn't look away from her. "Do you hear me? I promise you. You are going to be okay." In the distance, the faint, rising wail of ambulance sirens began to cut through the storm. The woman kept her hands firmly on me, refusing to let go. Her face was the very last thing I saw before the white-hot pain swallowed me completely, and everything went black. I have no memory of the ambulance ride. I don't remember the frantic, jarring rush through the sliding automatic doors of the emergency room, or the blinding glare of the trauma bay lights. My first conscious memory was a sound. Beep, 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 steady, rhythmic, and painfully loud. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt like they were stitched shut with lead thread. The air smelled sharply of rubbing alcohol, iodine, and clean linen. My chest felt tight, bound tightly in something rigid, and every shallow breath I took sent a sharp, agonizing spike of pain through my ribs. Then, I heard a voice. The same solid, grounding voice from the rain. "She has a severe grade 2 concussion, 2 fractured ribs, and you are actively monitoring her for internal bleeding," the woman was saying. Her tone was low, but it held a rigid, unyielding authority. "Ma'am, I understand you're concerned," a tired-sounding nurse replied, the squeak of her rubber shoes moving closer to my bed. "But hospital policy during a state of emergency is strict. Only immediate, biological family can be in the room right now. You need to wait in the lobby. I am the driver who hit her. I brought her in. I am staying until her parents arrive, or until I know for an absolute fact she is safe," the woman countered. There was no argument in her voice. It was a statement of fact. "Call hospital security if you feel you have to. But I am not leaving this chair." I heard the nurse sigh, the rustle of a chart being flipped closed and then retreating footsteps. I drifted away again, sinking into a heavy, dark current. Time lost its shape. It could have been minutes or hours before the heavy wooden door to my room pushed open again. This time the footsteps were chaotic. Familiar. We're Chloe Vance's parents. Dad's voice rushed into the room, breathless and strained. "The police called us. They said she was in an accident. Mr. and Mrs. Vance." The woman's voice cut through the air. The warmth she had used with me in the street was entirely gone. It was replaced by a sharp, freezing professionalism. "I am Dr. Margaret Hayes." There was a heavy pause. The rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor seemed to echo in the quiet room. My analytical brain, slowly firing back online, registered the shift in the atmosphere. "Wait," Mom said, her voice dropping its frantic pitch. You're the policy professor at the National College. the Dean of Graduate Studies. I read your published work on youth endangerment for my book club last year. I am, Dr. Hayes said smoothly. The sound of a chair scraping against the linoleum told me she had stood up to face them. And I am also the person who hit your daughter with my car tonight. Oh God. Dad exhaled quickly, shifting immediately into defense mode. Well, it was an accident. We don't blame you, Dr. Hayes. The storm is terrible. Chloe has a history of acting out. She ran out into the road in the middle of a warning. You couldn't have known. She was 16 years old, soaking wet, and wandering 3 miles from her home at midnight in a flash flood warning. Dr. Hayes's voice rose, a terrifying, masterful blend of academic authority and pure, unrestrained rage. Why was she out there? Silence. A thick, suffocating silence. Mr. Vance, I asked you a direct question. There was. We had a family situation. Dad stammered. His usual booming, authoritative tone crumbled under her scrutiny. A discipline issue. A discipline issue. Dr. Hayes repeated the words slowly, rolling them around in her mouth like they tasted of poison. What kind of discipline issue involves locking a minor out of her primary residence in a severe storm? In my line of work, we don't call that discipline. We call that child endangerment. It wasn't like that, Mom pleaded softly. Then what was it exactly like? Dr. Hayes took a step closer to them. Because your daughter told me something very specific right before she lost consciousness on the asphalt. She told me her parents didn't want her anymore. She said you told her she was sick. More silence. I could picture Dad's face, the panic of his pristine reputation suddenly threatening to shatter. Then a small, scared voice piped up from the doorway. Harper. She's lying, Harper whimpered perfectly. Chloe's making that up. She was barely conscious. She hates us. She wasn't making anything up, Dr. Hayes snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. Harper's fake crying stopped instantly. Dr. Hayes didn't buy the tears for a microsecond. I managed to force my eyes open to a narrow slit. The harsh fluorescent lights burned. I saw Dr. Hayes standing tall, blocking my bed from my family. Dad was pale, his hands nervously gripping the edge of his rain jacket. Harper was hiding slightly behind Mom, her eyes wide with genuine panic now. The trap she had set for me had just snapped shut on them. I have already contacted the hospital social worker on call, Dr. Hayes continued coldly, and the 2 police officers who took my official statement are waiting right outside that door. Now listen here, that won't be necessary. Dad puffed up his chest, trying to reclaim control of the room. He pointed a finger at her. We are her parents. We will handle this from here. You can leave. With all due respect, sir, you have handled it enough. Dr. Hayes said, not flinching an inch. You have actively endangered her life. This is no longer a private family matter. She is my daughter, Dad yelled, his composure completely snapping. The moment you locked a minor out in a storm and she ended up bleeding on the hood of my car, it stopped being a family matter. It became a legal one. Dr. Hayes turned her back to him and walked to the side of my bed. She looked down and saw my eyes open. Her face softened instantly. She reached out and her warm, dry hand gently wrapped around my freezing, bruised fingers. It was the first time in years an adult had touched me with genuine care. The heavy door opened again. A police officer in a dark, wet uniform stepped into the room, his radio crackling with static. Mr. Vance, we need you and your wife to step out into the hallway to answer some questions regarding the timeline of tonight's events. We haven't done anything wrong. Mom's voice was shaking violently. She looked terrified, not of my injuries but of the officer's notebook. Your 16-year-old daughter was hit by a vehicle at midnight because she was barred from entering her home. We need to understand the exact circumstances, the officer said flatly. Dad looked at me, his face a mix of fury and fear. He opened his mouth to speak, to probably order me to tell the police it was a misunderstanding. Dr. Hayes noticed. She stood up taller. She's waking up and needs medical attention. Everyone out. Now. Officer, please. This is a misunderstanding. Dad started. Out. Dr. Hayes commanded. Footsteps shuffled reluctantly. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing out Dad's frantic excuses. The room was suddenly quiet again, save for the steady beep of my heart monitor. Dr. Hayes leaned over the bed guardrail, her thumb gently tracing the back of my hand. I looked into her eyes, searching for the catch, the hidden variable. But there was only fierce, undeniable protection. You're safe now, she whispered, her voice steady and certain. I promise you, Chloe. I will not let them back in. You are safe. My analytical brain wanted to reject the data. Safe was a foreign concept. I hadn't been safe in my own home since I was 12 years old. But the warmth of her hand was real. The closed door was real. I let my heavy eyelids fall shut, And for the first time in my life, I didn't try to calculate my next move. I just let the darkness pull me under, trusting that someone else was finally standing guard. When I finally woke up properly 2 days later, the storm had passed, leaving behind a cold, pale morning light that spilled through the hospital blinds. The room was incredibly quiet. The steady beep of the heart monitor had slowed to a calm rhythm. I turned my head, my neck stiff and aching. Sitting in a cheap vinyl chair beside my bed was Dr. Hayes. She had her laptop open, grading papers, a cold cup of coffee resting on the tray table. She hadn't left. My parents visited exactly once. They didn't come rushing in with tears or apologies. They walked in trailing closely behind a hospital social worker named Brenda. They stood at the foot of my hospital bed, wearing their heavy winter coats, looking horribly uncomfortable. They looked like strangers forced to share an elevator. Harper was nowhere to be seen. "We're glad you're okay," Mom said. Her voice was stiff, entirely hollow. She clutched her expensive leather purse with both hands. Dad nodded, his eyes darting to the hallway and back. "You gave us quite a scare, Chloe, running out into the rain like that." My analytical mind processed their body language immediately. They weren't here to bring me home. They were here because they were terrified. They were managing a public relations crisis. Neither of them said the word sorry. Neither of them explained why they had locked the door. They just stood there, waiting for the social worker to give them their cues. Brenda, a woman with tired but incredibly kind eyes, asked my parents to wait in the hall. When the door clicked shut, she pulled up a chair. She spoke in a gentle, practiced voice, asking questions about my home environment, my family dynamics, and exactly what had happened that night. For the first time in my life, I didn't hold back to keep the peace. I told her everything. I told her about the stolen money, the ignored achievements, and the fake text messages. I told her about the purple bruise Harper had given herself, and the look of pure, cold triumph on my sister's face as I was thrown out. I repeated the exact words my father had used. "Sick daughter." Brenda listened in silence, taking meticulous notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she let out a long, heavy sigh. "Chloe," Brenda said softly, leaning forward, "Child Protective Services is officially investigating your parents for gross neglect and child endangerment. Because of the severity of the storm and your injuries, this is a criminal matter now. You have options. You do not have to go back to that house." A wave of relief mixed with terrifying grief washed over me. Where else would I go? I asked, a single tear finally spilling over my bruised cheek. Dr. Hayes, who had stepped out during the interview, knocked firmly and walked back in. She stood tall at the end of my bed. "She is not going back to them," she told Brenda smoothly. "I have already spoken extensively with my lawyer." Brenda looked at her, shaking her head slightly. "Dr. Hayes, I appreciate everything you've done to protect her, but you are the driver involved in the traffic accident. Ethically and legally, CPS cannot place her in your immediate custody. It is a massive conflict of interest." "I know the law, Brenda," Dr. Hayes said, her voice calm and completely unshakable. "I know she has to go to a state-approved temporary youth facility first, but I am filing to be her official educational advocate this afternoon, and my legal team is preparing a petition for foster sponsorship. I have the financial resources, the spotless background checks, and the intent. If her parents fight to keep her, we take them to family court and expose exactly what they did that night on public record." Brenda looked between the two of us. She tapped her pen against her notepad. "If the parents voluntarily surrender their custody rights, to avoid the endangerment charges, they will," I whispered from the bed. Both women looked at me. My chest hurt with every breath, but my mind was completely clear. I knew the variables of my family perfectly. Dad cares about his reputation more than anything else in the world. A public court case about child neglect would ruin his career. If giving me up makes the police go away, he'll sign whatever you want. And they did. To avoid criminal charges and a devastating public scandal, my parents signed the papers. They surrendered their parental rights. Just like that, I was an equation they couldn't balance, so they simply erased me from the board. I spent the next 3 weeks in a temporary youth group home. It was loud, chaotic, and scary, but Dr. Hayes visited me every single day. She brought me advanced science books, helped me navigate my makeup homework, and made absolutely sure I knew I hadn't been forgotten. Within a month, her powerful legal team navigated the heavy red tape. The state granted her temporary guardianship, which eventually became permanent. 8 months later, I was a completely different person. Same name, different life. Margaret. She insisted I call her Margaret when we were at home. Lived in a beautiful historic house near the university. It was quiet, highly organized, and full of ceiling-high bookshelves, thriving green plants, and soft classical music. She gave me the large guest room, and told me to paint it whatever color I wanted. I transferred to a new high school. I started fresh. Nobody knew about Harper, about the storm, or about the label sick daughter. I was just Chloe, smart, focused, and finally free to breathe without waiting for an explosion. Margaret exposed me to a world I'd never imagined. I attended university lectures, listened to research symposiums, and sat quietly at dinner parties with brilliant professors discussing public policy, equity, and systemic change. Education is absolute freedom, Chloe, Margaret would tell me, pouring tea in our quiet kitchen. Knowledge is power. If you build your mind, no one can ever take your foundation away from you. I threw myself into my studies with a fierce, burning focus. Straight A+ weren't just grades anymore. They were armor. They were solid, undeniable proof. Proof that I wasn't sick. Proof that I wasn't broken. By my senior year of high school, my grief had hardened into a sharp, brilliant purpose. I got a full-ride academic scholarship to a prestigious university. Margaret wept openly at my high school graduation, holding me tight. "I am so incredibly proud of you," she whispered into my hair. I majored in education policy and social justice, and minored in psychology. I wanted to understand the broken systems that allowed kids like me to fall through the cracks when their own blood betrayed them. During my summers, I interned at nonprofits and youth advocacy groups. I learned how funding moved, how legal programs started, and how to turn deep empathy into actionable life-saving legislation. I graduated magna cum laude. I was hired immediately as a research coordinator at a massive university education department. At 24, sitting in my own professional office, I finally had the leverage to do what I had promised myself I would do. I drafted a massive proposal for a scholarship and mentorship program specifically designed for students from abusive or neglectful family situations. Kids who had been kicked out, emancipated minors, kids who desperately needed a second chance. I called it the New Beginnings Scholarship. Margaret helped me navigate the intense university bureaucracy. Together we secured massive funding from 3 different philanthropic organizations. We launched the program at one university as a pilot. It was a massive success. Then we expanded to 3 universities. Then 6. By the time I was 25, we had awarded over $300,000 in scholarships. We had helped 58 students afford housing, stay in school, and stay hopeful. The media started paying attention. Education journals requested interviews. Whenever I spoke at conferences, I told my story carefully, keeping it vague. I was a 16-year-old girl who was told she didn't belong, I would say to the crowds. I never named names. I thought I had completely left the Vance family in the past. I thought the ghost of my old life was finally at rest. Then, Kevin knocked on my office door. Kevin Foster tapped his knuckles lightly against the frosted glass of my office door before pushing it open. He held a thick, cream-colored folder in his hands. He was smiling, his eyes bright with professional excitement. "Chloe, do you have a minute?" he asked, stepping inside and closing the door. "Always," I said, setting my pen down on a stack of scholarship applications. "What is it?" "The board just got a formal request. You are being considered for the keynote speaker position at a major university graduation ceremony this spring." He opened the folder and slid a formal letter across my desk. "It's a huge honor. They want you." I looked down at the letterhead. The elegant gold-embossed letters seemed to jump off the page. Cedar Creek University. My stomach dropped completely. The air in my office suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. I stopped breathing for a second, my analytical mind freezing as it processed the data. "Which university?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Cedar Creek," Kevin repeated, his smile faltering as he noticed my sudden stillness. "Is something wrong?" I stared at the gold lettering. My hands resting on my desk felt numb. "That is my sister's school." Kevin blinked, genuinely surprised. In the 3 years we had worked closely together, I had never mentioned my family. "I didn't know you had a sister." "I don't. Not anymore," I said quietly, keeping my eyes locked on the paper. "But yes, she goes there. She is 22. She graduates this spring." Kevin slowly pulled up a chair and sat down. The professional excitement vanished from his face, replaced by deep concern. He knew the broad strokes of my past. Everyone in the program did, even if they didn't know the names. He knew I came from a broken, toxic place. "Chloe," he said softly, "do you want me to decline on your behalf? I can tell them your schedule is full. You don't have to do this." I didn't answer right away. I looked around my office. I looked at the 58 physical files stacked neatly on my desk. 58 students who had been thrown away, just like I had been. 58 second chances that I had helped build from the ground up. What is the theme of the ceremony? I asked, my voice steadying. Resilience and educational equity, Kevin answered carefully. President Mitchell specifically requested you. He said your work with the New Beginnings program embodies everything he wants the graduating class to hear. My work. The program born directly from being locked out in a storm. Born from the words sick daughter. Would I have complete creative control over my speech? I asked, finally looking up at him. Absolute control. They just want you there, speaking your truth. I thought about Harper sitting in the audience in her cap and gown, smiling, probably bragging to her friends about her perfect, flawless family. I thought about my parents sitting in the stadium seats, proud and oblivious, still firmly believing they had made the right choice 9 years ago. I thought about standing on that massive stage, holding the microphone, and finally telling my story. Not for revenge. I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted closure. I wanted to balance the equation. I need to talk to Margaret, I told Kevin. That night, the house was perfectly quiet. Margaret and I sat at the dining room table. I pushed my roasted vegetables around my plate, the silence stretching between us. I finally laid the letter on the table. Margaret put her fork down. She read the letter in silence. She didn't gasp or act shocked. She just folded her hands and looked directly into my eyes. They have absolutely no idea I exist in this capacity, I told her, my voice tight. They don't know I built this program. I don't know what they think happened to the 16-year-old girl they threw away. What do you want to happen, Chloe? Margaret asked. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the fierce protective steel underneath it. I want to close the chapter, I said, leaning forward. Not with anger, just with the truth. And if the truth hurts them, well, they hurt me first. I took a shaky breath. I'm not doing this to be vindictive, Margaret. I'm doing this because my story matters. Because showing them exactly who I became, despite what they did to me, that is honest. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand tightly. Her eyes shone with a fierce pride. Then you do it. You do it on your terms. With your head held high, you go to that stage and you show them exactly who you are now. I called Kevin the next morning. Tell President Mitchell I accept. I didn't try to see Harper in person, but I needed to know what I was walking into. Social media makes ghosts visible. That night, sitting alone in the dark of my bedroom, the blue light of my laptop illuminating my face, I typed her name into the search bar. Her profile was public. It was a masterclass in curated perfection. Her senior year was perfectly documented in bright filtered photos and carefully written captions. Can't believe I'm graduating in 3 months. One caption read, so grateful for my amazing parents who supported me every single step of the way. Blessed family first. I scrolled down slowly. It felt like picking at a deep scar. There were no old photos of me. There were no mentions of an older sister. In her digital world, I had never even been born. Then one specific post caught my eye. It was a picture of Harper at a fancy restaurant with our parents. They had big smiles, their wine glasses raised toward the camera. I stared at the screen, my chest aching with a dull old pain. Dad looked older, his hair graying at the temples. Mom looked tired around the eyes, but they looked genuinely happy, proud. They had successfully built their perfect family by cutting me out of the frame. I was about to close the laptop when I clicked on a screenshot she had posted of a group chat with her friends. They were discussing graduation day. The keynote speaker is supposed to be some big director. One friend had written. Harper's reply was right below it. Ugh, those speeches are always so boring and long, but whatever. It's my day, I'm just there for the diploma. I stared at her words. A slow, quiet calm washed over me. I took a screenshot of that message and saved it to my desktop. Not for revenge, just as a quiet reminder that she had absolutely no idea what was coming for her. I spent 3 agonizing weeks writing the speech. I drafted, revised, cut, and added. I wanted it to be perfect. I read it aloud to Margaret in the living room a dozen times, timing my pauses, controlling my breathing. Do not mention their names, Margaret advised me one evening, handing me a cup of tea. Keep it strictly professional. Keep it broad. Tell the story and let them connect the dots themselves. If you glare at them from the stage, it makes the moment about their guilt. Make it about your survival. She was entirely right. The speech opened with hard statistics, educational inequity, students who fall through systemic cracks. Then halfway through, it shifted. It became personal. I practiced in front of the hallway mirror until my face stayed calm, composed, and professional. No tears, no yelling, just cold, undeniable facts. The night before the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring up at the dark ceiling. The wind was blowing outside, rattling the window frame slightly. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my dad's voice echoing in the dark. "Sick daughter. Get out." My bedroom door opened softly. Margaret came in, holding 2 mugs of warm chamomile tea. She sat on the edge of my bed. "Second thoughts?" she asked softly. "Just old thoughts," I admitted, sitting up and taking the warm mug. "Listen to me," Margaret said, her voice anchoring me to the present. "You are not the terrified girl they threw out into the rain. You are the woman who built herself back up from nothing. Remember that tomorrow. Will you be there?" I asked, my voice suddenly feeling very small. "Front row," she said, smiling fiercely. "Always." Morning came far too fast. I dressed with meticulous care. A sharp navy blue suit. Professional, powerful, but not stiff. I fastened Margaret's grandmother's pearl necklace around my throat. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a victim. I saw a senior director. I was ready. The campus of Cedar Creek University was beautiful, the kind of place designed to make people feel safe and successful. Ancient brick buildings covered in ivy stood tall against a bright, cloudless sky. The manicured lawns were flooded with hundreds of students in black caps and gowns, surrounded by beaming parents holding bouquets of flowers and expensive cameras. The air hummed with happy, chaotic energy. I arrived an hour early. Walking through the crowds, I felt like a ghost who had finally learned how to be solid. I watched fathers adjusting their daughters' graduation caps. I watched mothers crying happy tears. I felt a small, distant ache in my chest, but I pushed it down, replacing it with the cold, smooth armor of my purpose. I met President Mitchell in his spacious office. He was a warm, effusive man with a booming voice. "Miss Vance, we are absolutely honored to have you here," he said, shaking my hand vigorously. "Your work with the scholarship program is extraordinary. The board was unanimous in choosing you." "Thank you, President Mitchell," I replied, keeping my voice even, my smile professional. "It is a privilege." Kevin, my colleague, walked me to the backstage area of the massive auditorium. It was a controlled chaos of stagehands, lighting technicians, and nervous faculty members adjusting their academic robes. The air smelled of hairspray, nervous sweat, and the heavy dust of old velvet curtains. Kevin handed me a glossy, thick graduation program. "Here you go. Your name is on page 2. I took the heavy cardstock. My hands were perfectly steady. I didn't open to page 2. I flipped directly to the middle, running my index finger down the long columns of tiny printed names. Row 4. Seat 12. Harper Vance Miller, Bachelor of Arts Communications. My heart kicked once, hard against my ribs. Seeing her name in print made the impending collision incredibly real. A hand touched my shoulder. I turned, and Margaret was there. She wore a stunning emerald green dress, her silver hair pulled back elegantly. She looked like a queen stepping into a battlefield. She pulled me into a tight embrace. "You've got this," she whispered in my ear. "I know," I breathed out, grounding myself in the scent of her familiar perfume. Head high, truth clear, no revenge, just honesty. The auditorium was filling rapidly. Beyond the heavy curtains, the low roar of hundreds of voices echoed off the high, domed ceiling. Somewhere out in that sea of people, my biological parents were finding their seats. They were probably arguing lightly about the best angle for photos. They had absolutely no idea whose name was listed in the small print on page 2. President Mitchell touched my elbow. 10 minutes, Ms. Vance. We're getting ready to start." I closed my eyes and took one deep, calculating breath. This was the moment the timeline split forever. The ceremonial music began, a grand, sweeping march. The faculty filed out first, followed by the endless stream of graduates. I waited in the shadows of the wings, watching the procession. Finally, President Mitchell stepped up to the heavy wooden podium at the center of the stage. He tapped the microphone. "Welcome, graduates, families, and honored guests." His voice boomed over the massive speakers. "Today we celebrate achievement, resilience, and boundless potential. Our keynote speaker today embodies these exact values. She has dedicated her entire professional career to ensuring that every student has access to opportunity, regardless of their background. Please welcome the Senior Director of the New Beginnings Scholarship Program, Ms. Chloe Vance." The auditorium erupted into polite, rolling applause. I stepped out from the shadows and into the blinding hot stage lights. The stage was massive. Beyond the front row, the faces blurred into a dizzying sea of black caps and gowns, stretching all the way to the back balconies. I walked with measured, deliberate steps. My posture was perfectly straight, My heels clicked against the hollow stage floor. Click, click, click. A steady rhythmic countdown to the explosion. I reached the podium. I didn't look at my notes. I placed my hands lightly on the wooden edges and looked out. I let my eyes adjust to the glare, and then I found her. Row 4, center aisle, Harper. She was in her cap and gown, laughing. She was turned halfway in her seat, whispering something to the girl beside her hands clapping politely for the speaker she hadn't bothered to look at yet. Then Harper turned her head toward the stage. She saw me. It was like watching a film suddenly lose power. Her hands froze mid-clap, suspended in the air. The laughing smile wiped off her face so fast it looked violent. Confusion rippled across her features, instantly followed by recognition. Then absolute sheer shock. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking translucent, sick. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. I didn't hold her gaze. I smoothly shifted my eyes deeper into the crowd. Row 9, Mom and Dad. They were sitting together. Dad was still clapping, looking toward the stage with mild interest. Mom was fixing the strap of her purse. They were just polite audience members applauding a stranger. They couldn't clearly see my face from that distance yet. I looked down at the front row, stage right. Margaret sat there, her hands folded in her lap. She gave me one small firm nod. Begin. I leaned into the microphone. Good morning, I said. My voice carried clear, strong, and amplified across the heads of 1,000 people. In row 9, Dad's head jerked up. I watched his hands stop clapping. They just hovered in the air. He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes squinting against the stage lights, his brain desperately trying to process why a stranger's voice sounded like a ghost from his living room. Beside him, Mom's hand flew to her chest, gripping her blouse. I smiled. It was professional, warm, and utterly detached. Thank you, President Mitchell, for that generous introduction. It is a profound honor to be here today. Today I want to talk to you about resilience. I want to talk about what happens when you lose absolutely everything, and find yourself anyway. The auditorium settled into a quiet, attentive hush. Let me tell you a story about a 16-year-old girl, I began, my voice steady, falling into the familiar cadence of a lecture. She lived in a house where the truth was flexible. One night she was told she didn't belong. She was told that something was fundamentally, irreparably wrong with her. She was told she was too broken to keep. Mom's hand shot out and gripped Dad's forearm. Even from the stage I could see the sheer paralyzing panic setting into their rigid postures. One night, in the middle of a severe state of emergency storm, I continued pacing my words perfectly, letting the cold reality drop into the warm room. She was put out of her house. The door was locked behind her. She was told she wasn't wanted anymore. A murmur rippled through the crowd, uncomfortable shifting. People love a triumph story, but the sheer cruelty of the tragedy always shocks them first. She wandered alone in that blinding rain for hours. No phone, no money, nowhere to go. She was hit by a car in the dark, and she nearly died on the asphalt. In row 4, Harper had gone completely still. She looked paralyzed, her shoulders hunched up by her ears as if she were trying to hide inside her graduation gown. But someone stopped, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. Someone helped. Someone looked at a bleeding teenager and saw potential where everyone else had only seen problems. I gestured gracefully toward the front row. That person became her mentor, her advocate, and her mother in every single way that mattered. I paused. I let the silence stretch out over the crowd. I let it hang in the air until the tension was thick enough to cut. Then I leaned closer to the microphone. That 16-year-old girl was me. The auditorium went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. In row 9, Dad stood up halfway, his face gray, his jaw hanging open. Mom grabbed his jacket and yanked him back down into his seat. Both of them stared at the stage, looking exactly like they were watching a nightmare unfold in broad daylight. In row 4, Harper looked like she was suffocating. Students around her began to whisper, their heads turning from the stage down to her frozen, pale face. They were putting the pieces together. I am standing here today because Dr. Margaret Hayes refused to give up on me when the people who were biologically obligated to protect me chose to walk away. I said, my voice ringing with undeniable power. She taught me that rejection is not an ending. It is a beginning. The New Beginnings Scholarship Program was born directly from that storm. It exists for students who have been dismissed, abandoned, and cast aside by the people they trusted most. I looked across the vast sea of graduates. I wasn't just talking to my sister anymore. I was talking to all of them. Somewhere in the back, near the soundboard, A woman whispered loudly enough for the microphone to catch a faint echo. Oh my God. I didn't break my rhythm. I learned something vital in those years after the storm. Family is not always biology. Sometimes, family is a choice. Sometimes, it is the people who actively choose to stay when others find it easier to leave. Margaret wiped a single tear from her cheek, smiling up at me. I learned that you do not need everyone to believe your truth. I gripped the wooden edges of the podium, leaning in. You just need one person who sees past the surface, past the accusations, and past the lies. Harper's face finally crumpled. She dropped her head, staring down at her lap, her shoulders shaking violently. The perfect curated facade had completely shattered. Her friends sitting next to her had physically leaned away, staring at her in horror. And I learned, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, intense register, that true success isn't about proving people wrong. It is about building something meaningful despite them. Dad had buried his face in his trembling hands. Mom was crying silently, her shoulders heaving, her makeup ruined. So, to the graduating class of Cedar Creek University, I leave you with this final thought, I said, sweeping my gaze over the room one last time. Your worth is not determined by who stays. It is determined by how you grow after they leave. You will face rejection. You will face people who underestimate you. That is guaranteed. But you get to decide what happens next. You get to choose who you become. I took a step back from the microphone. For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. Then, the front row stood up. The faculty followed. The applause started slowly, then swelled into a massive, deafening roar. A standing ovation. The sound echoed off the walls, heavy and overwhelming. Not everyone stood, of course. Dad stayed glued to his chair, looking utterly destroyed. Mom stood mechanically, clapping weakly, tears pouring down her face. Harper didn't move an inch. She sat entirely frozen, crying into her graduation gown, completely isolated in a sea of standing, cheering people. President Mitchell practically ran to the podium, beaming, clapping his hands together. Thank you, Ms. Vance. That was incredibly powerful. Thank you. I smiled at him. I turned, walked off the stage, stepped back into the cool shadows of the wings, and finally, for the first time in 9 years, I took a completely full, untroubled breath. The ceremony continued, but the energy in the massive auditorium had completely fractured. I stayed hidden in the dark wings backstage, watching through a narrow gap in the heavy velvet curtains. When they finally called Harper Vance Miller, my sister stood up. Her legs looked unsteady. She walked across the stage, her smile tight, forced, and incredibly fragile. As she reached out to accept her leather diploma cover, her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. The applause that followed her across the stage was noticeably thin. It was scattered, awkward clapping. I watched her friends in the 4th row. 2 of them had their hands folded flat in their laps. They just watched her, their faces blank with new horrifying realization. After the final name was called, the graduates tossed their caps into the air. Cheers erupted. Families rushed forward down the aisles. I let the curtain fall shut and turned away. I slipped out a side door and met Margaret and Kevin in the quiet reception area. You did it, Margaret said, stepping forward and hugging me fiercely. Her voice was thick with emotion. I did, I whispered back, feeling a massive, invisible weight finally lift off my chest. Kevin appeared, running a hand through his hair. He looked slightly flustered, holding his clipboard like a shield. Chloe, that was wow. I had absolutely no idea. Are you okay? I'm fine, Kevin. Really? He swallowed hard. Okay. Well, I need to tell you something. Your parents are waiting at the side entrance. They are asking to see you. My stomach tightened instinctively. The old familiar fear tried to rise in my throat, but I forced it back down. Are they angry? They don't look angry, Kevin said carefully. They look shattered. Do you want me to have security escort them out? You don't have to face them. No. I straightened my suit jacket, my fingers brushing against Margaret's pearl necklace. I will talk to them. On my exact terms. 10 minutes. That's it. Margaret linked her arm firmly through mine. I am right beside you. We walked down the long carpeted hallway toward the side entrance. The air felt heavier with every step. They were standing near a large marble pillar, away from the celebrating crowds. Dad looked 10 years older. His face was entirely gray. His shoulders slumped like all the air had been let out of his lungs. Mom's expensive makeup was smeared under her eyes, her hands nervously twisting the strap of her purse. Harper hovered behind them, her eyes red and swollen, clutching her diploma to her chest like a piece of armor. I stopped exactly 4 feet away from them. Professional distance. You wanted to talk? I asked. My voice was calm, level, and completely empty of anger. Dad's mouth opened, then closed. A pathetic, forced twitch of a smile pulled at the corner of his lips before collapsing. Chloe, we didn't know you would be here. I am sure you didn't. Mom took a hesitant step forward. You look. Her voice broke, a raw, jagged sound. You look so well, Chloe. Looking at her trembling lip, a sudden memory flashed violently in my mind. I am 16. I am lying in the hospital bed, my ribs screaming in pain. A police officer is standing in the doorway with a notepad. I am watching Mom cry exactly like this, her voice breaking in the exact same jagged way as she lies to the officer. We didn't lock her out, she had sobbed, playing the perfect victim. She ran away. I had felt completely numb watching her lie that night. I felt that exact same cold detachment now. I am well, I stated simply. Dr. Hayes made absolutely sure of that. Dad's eyes flicked over to Margaret, then instantly dropped to the floor, heavy with shame. We owe you an apology, he rasped. You owe me a lot more than that, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly flat. But an apology is a starting point. We made a terrible mistake, Mom whispered, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes. We should have listened to you. You should have protected me, I corrected her. That is what parents are supposed to do, but you chose Harper's lies over my truth. You called me a sick daughter. You threw me out into a severe storm, and then you signed away your legal rights to avoid a CPS investigation and save your reputation. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I simply laid out the brutal, undeniable facts. Harper flinched as if I had struck her. We were wrong, Dad pleaded, his voice cracking. His hands reached out toward me, trembling. I was wrong. I have regretted that night every single day for 9 years. Good. The single word hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Can we talk? Mom begged, reaching her hand out inches from my arm. Privately, over dinner, as a family? We are not a family, I said gently. It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was just a fact. You made that completely clear 9 years ago. But we can fix it, Dad said, a desperate, frantic edge to his voice. We want to fix it. Please, Chloe. There is nothing left to fix. You made your choice to save your reputation. I made my choice to save my life. We are done. Chloe. Harper's voice was barely a whisper. She stepped out from behind Mom. I'm sorry. I was 13. I was stupid. I didn't know. You were old enough to download a fake text generator. I cut her off smoothly, shutting down her familiar tears before they could start. You were old enough to bruise your own arm. You knew exactly what you were doing. Before Harper could respond, President Mitchell walked past, completely oblivious to the crushing tension. Miss Vance. The best keynote speech we've had in a decade. The students are deeply moved. He paused, looking at my parents. Are you Chloe's family? You must be incredibly proud of her. A suffocating silence fell over the group. Margaret stepped forward, her eyes locking onto my father's pale face. They are, she said, her voice dripping with icy politeness. Aren't you Mr. Vance? Dad's jaw worked, his face flushing dark red. Yes, he choked out, very proud. President Mitchell beamed, shook my hand warmly and walked away. Dad stared at me, his eyes wet. We had absolutely no idea you were doing all of this, building this program. You erased me from your home, I said softly. You pretended I never existed. Why would you know? I tried to find you, Mom sobbed. After you left the group home, you disappeared from the system. I legally changed my last name, I explained. I made it impossible for you to find me. I needed the space to heal. Did you? Dad asked, a desperate hope flickering in his eyes. Did you heal? Yes. No thanks to you. Just then footsteps approached from the hallway. 3 of Harper's friends, the ones I had seen sitting beside her, stopped a few feet away. They looked deeply uncomfortable, their eyes shifting between me and Harper. Harper, a tall girl with blonde hair, said, her voice tight. Is that true? Is she really your older sister? Harper nodded, unable to speak, fresh tears streaming down her face. You told us you were an only child, another girl said, crossing her arms defensively. I know. Harper stammered, backing up a step. Last year you told everyone your sister died. The tall girl's voice turned ice cold. You sat in my dorm room and cried, and told me she died in a car crash when you were 13. My eyebrows rose. I looked at Harper. You told people I was dead. Harper's face flushed a violent burning red. She looked trapped, suffocating under the weight of her own massive web of lies. It was just easier than explaining. Explaining what? The blonde girl demanded. That your family locked her out in a storm? That you lied to get her thrown out? It wasn't like that, Harper pleaded. Then what was it like? The third friend looked at me, her expression softening into deep pity. I am so sorry this happened to you. Thank you, I said quietly. The three girls turned their backs on Harper and walked away without another word. Harper stood there, utterly alone, watching her carefully constructed social life completely implode in real time. Harper, Mom started, reaching for her. Don't. Harper slapped Mom's hand away. She looked at me, her chest heaving. I wanted to tell them the truth so many times, but I was terrified everyone would hate me. She wiped her eyes roughly. They were right to. I deserve this. I stepped slightly closer to her, lowering my voice. Harper, I don't hate you, I forgive you, but I am doing it for my own peace, not for yours. I don't want a relationship with you. I need you to respect that. Can't we just try? Dad started again. No, my voice was firm, clear and final. You made choices for 9 years to keep me erased. That is who you became. I turned away from them and looked at Margaret. Can we go now? Yes, Margaret smiled, linking her arm back through mine. Let's go home. We walked down the hallway, toward the bright glass doors leading outside. I didn't look back. Behind us I heard Harper crying loudly. I heard my father saying my name, a weak, desperate sound echoing off the marble. I just kept walking. The weeks that followed were strange and quiet. My speech went viral. A student had recorded it on their phone and posted it online. It hit 120,000 views in 3 days. The comments flooded in. Family isn't blood, it's who shows up. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Voicemails from Dad pleading for just one coffee. Long rambling emails from Mom full of excuses about how stressed she was back then. I didn't reply to a single one. An email came from one of Harper's former friends. The subject line read, "You deserve to know." Inside were screenshots of a massive group chat. Harper's friends were completely icing her out. One message read, "I can't believe she lied about her sister being dead for sympathy. That's psychotic." Harper's social life had completely crumbled. The larger part of me felt nothing but a quiet, heavy relief. 3 weeks after graduation, the receptionist at my office buzzed my desk. Dad had shown up in the lobby. I had security bring him up. I gave him exactly 10 minutes. He sat in the chair across from my desk, looking broken. Harper told us the whole truth, he said, staring at his hands. Last week she finally broke down. She confessed everything. The fake texts, the manipulation, bruising herself, all of it. I am so incredibly sorry, Chloe. I leaned back in my chair, looking at him. 9 years too late, Dad. I know it doesn't fix anything, but we've been living with this guilt. Can you ever forgive us? Forgiveness isn't the issue, I explained calmly. Trust is. You threw me out into a storm, and then you abandoned me to the state to save your own skin. You don't know what it is like to be 16, homeless, freezing and told by your own father that you are too sick to love. Tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. What can I do? Tell me what to do. Nothing. It is too late. I have a family now. He left my office quietly. He never came back. 5 days later, an email arrived from Harper. It was a long, painful confession. She admitted her jealousy, how she carefully planned the screenshots, and how she watched me walk out into the storm feeling sick to her stomach, but was too proud and scared to stop it. I destroyed your life, she wrote, and I destroyed my own too. I lost my job offer last week because someone from graduation told the hiring manager about my family situation. I am not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know I am sorry. I replied with a short final message. Harper, I accept that you were young and made a terrible mistake, but you had 9 years to correct it. I forgive you for my own peace, but I do not want contact. Please respect my boundary. She never emailed me again. 2 years have passed since Harper's graduation. My life looks completely different. The New Beginnings Scholarship has expanded to 12 universities. We have helped 94 students find their footing. I was promoted to Senior Regional Director. Last month, Margaret turned. We threw a massive, beautiful party in her backyard. It was filled with colleagues, friends, and dozens of the students she had mentored over the decades. I stood up with a glass of champagne and gave a toast to the woman who taught me that family is built, not born. I looked at her, crying happy tears, and I knew exactly where I belonged. My biological parents sent a Christmas card once. There was no return address on the envelope, just their signatures inside. I looked at it for a moment, placed it in the bottom of a desk drawer, and moved on with my day. People often ask me if I regret that stormy night, if I wish I had just stayed quiet, or fought harder to stay in that house. I don't, because that storm led me here. It led me to this beautiful life, this vital work, and this family that I chose for myself. I learned the hard way that blood does not make a family. Choice does. Consistency does. Showing up when it is hard does. Margaret showed up every single day for 9 years. She earned the title of mom. My biological parents showed up once, failed the test, and surrendered their rights to save face. That tells you everything you will ever need to know. If you are standing in a storm right now, whether it is metaphorical or real, know this: you can survive it. You can even thrive after it passes. Set your boundaries hard like concrete. Choose your family carefully. Build your purpose out of your pain. And never ever let anyone tell you that you are too sick, too broken, or too much. You are exactly enough. Stepping out of the darkness and onto that stage was the hardest, most necessary thing I've ever done. There is a profound, undeniable power in surviving the storm and finally speaking your truth aloud. If you found a piece of your own journey in this story, if the heavy rain, the quiet resilience, and the relentless pursuit of a new baseline resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We all carry invisible scars from the people who were supposed to protect us. But by staying connected, we can continue to share the raw, unfiltered narratives that remind us our strength is real. Thank you for listening, for bearing witness to this truth, and for being part of a community that understands the true weight of starting over. I'll see you in the next story.